in counseling school, they said, I got the idea that we don't ask why questions because it presupposes a because.
Yes, right.
And we don't always know what the answer would be. So anytime, and why can be a real club,
Yeah.
So I'm with you on that. Like,
right.
Just say how, where, what.
Welcome to the Growth and Thriving podcast, where we celebrate those who have overcome trauma and adversity and examine the tools and techniques that help us grow. I'm your host, Dr. Jerry Sunshine Novak, and today we are talking to a friend of mine named Valerie Bringas Montgomery. She's a counselor here in Colorado Springs who owns her own therapy practice and has also recently started a coaching practice called Beyond Beautiful Pathways. Valerie is a member of our online communities, the Facebook groups of Growth and Thriving After Trauma and Thriving Fathers, Parenting After Trauma. And I personally have always very much appreciated her input, and participation in those groups has been very valuable. And let me not forget that Valerie also runs, or is the administrator for, I guess, a community of Colorado Springs therapists who do some cross-educating and information sharing and support for one another. So without further ado, Valerie, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Jerry. It's been lovely to get to know you more and integrate you into our local community with the meetup group, which is Mental Health Professionals of Southern Colorado, which I started in December of 2010 to create a place of support and connection and resource sharing.
That's great.
We have over 400 members now.
Yeah, it's a good group. I've been to a couple of events and always enjoyed them. Yeah.
So just a little about me and my background, would that be helpful?
You bet. I was just going to say, so tell us a little bit about yourself.
So there's so much that I could say, but let me just share right now that I came to Colorado as a military spouse and had my children in Colorado. I was a military spouse, a community volunteer, a stay-at-home mom, a 4-H group creator, leader, and homeschooled my kids for 5 years. And then I decided to apply for graduate school because I had a lifelong desire to become a counselor. My undergrad is in social work. And so it was about that time that I also realized it was like the junction of my former life with my current life, because I went through a major divorce. Wow. 21 and a half years. And what that did was exploded my worldview. And also, so my counseling is just who I am, but my history is what I've been through, and sometimes they overlap.
Sure.
So then I started reviewing everything that got me to where I was and how could I be in that worldview and situation that I'd had as truth.
Right.
And so then I was learning in counseling, which I love, and experience in my own practice and my work and my own growth in healing through multiple modalities.
Yeah. Yeah. And that what you're talking about right there is sort of the definition of meaning making, right? You've been through something that doesn't fit well with your previously held worldview, right? You went through something that maybe beforehand you would have thought would be impossible or would never happen to you. And that's what creates trauma, is that disconnect. This thing was supposed to be impossible, but it happened. And very often meaning making is a process of learning to accept that maybe our previously held worldview was incomplete or not broad enough. And we start to include and integrate in the new experiences and figure out how to use it to grow and potentially help others.
So I started to notice, what was it? I approached with curiosity. How did I get to be where I was?
Mm-hmm.
How did I come to be in that place? Because I was getting sick, like my body was getting sick. And I had to go through the portal of what was the faster, what I considered death. To remain where I was would have been a slower death. So I decided to go the faster death in my history and in my culture and background, which was divorce. So it's been an ongoing journey, and that was about 2004 I started that. So throughout my history, learning, and various supports that I've integrated into my journey, I discovered some points of very early trauma that a lot of people might not even know was happening. And that was my triplet loss in utero, about 3 months gestation.
Yeah.
So I was in the womb that survived, but my triplets were very gradually being reabsorbed. So that was a really early trauma.
Yeah.
And then my mother was put on bed rest for placenta previa at 6 months my gestation, and there were a lot of factors that were stressful for her. And then she nearly hemorrhaged to death at my birth.
Oh my goodness.
So then I was born. So
yeah.
I have a lot of capacity for sitting with people in their grief, but also, why am I here, and what about me was meant to survive?
Right. And I think you hit on a couple of things that are just, at least from my practice and my experience, so valuable and so important. The first one is approaching with curiosity, right? Why am I here? And that one is, I think, sounds way easier than it is, right? Especially, in the instances where I've been a supervisor for new therapists, right, or unlicensed therapists working. And there's a tendency, I think a very human tendency, to want to explain things, to understand. And there's also a sort of a cognitive need for efficiency. So we jump to conclusions very quickly, the things that make sense, things that would explain this, right? Whatever it is. And when you talk to people about approaching it with curiosity, it doesn't sound hard, but it requires a process of sort of recognizing that the very quick assumption we jump to might be inaccurate. And we have to monitor ourselves that way. So I thought, you kind of said it just sort of like, oh, I approached in curiosity, but that's a much bigger, purposeful, intentional process than people might give it credit for. And I think the ability to do that and to cultivate the capacity for that is a big piece of what helps people grow and thrive and approach something. And then the other piece you brought up, which I think is really important, is the idea that, whenever I talk about what I do in this coaching practice of mine, I refer to both trauma and adversity almost every time. People have been through trauma and adversity. And I don't think it's redundant to say that, because trauma is distinct from other kinds of adversity in that it lives in your nervous system, right? Your nervous system reacts as though the trauma were reoccurring. And so it is possible. And I think some people, especially those who are not in a counseling or psychology or maybe medical career, don't understand this as well, but it is possible to have trauma before you were born or in infancy, things that you don't remember because you couldn't encode them into memory, but they live in your nervous system still.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interject, but I wanted to highlight those things because it would be a shame to skim over them. So,
Well, I'm my best research project.
right.
I mean, and it's not because it's a cognitive experience.
Right.
It is a meaning making that I'm very interested in, and I've worked with different professionals. I've incorporated different healing modalities that have been really important to me on my journey, and I'm still working. I feel like the more that I heal, the more I realize that I am at another level of it, but the same thing affects me and I notice it and it just catches me off guard. But I thought I dealt with that 5 or 10 years ago.
Right.
But I think that's an important piece of all of this too, is I think that integration happens our whole lives.
Right. And I heard somebody once, I wish I could remember who said this, but I thought it was the most brilliant explanation of what I think you're talking about. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but they said it's like this kind of growth and progress is like going up a spiral staircase, right? Because you keep looking down and it's like, oh, there's the same view again, right? There's that same thing again, except I'm not in the same place. I'm maybe further from it or higher up or at a different place, but it's still that same thing when I look down, right? It's not new necessarily. There may be new things, but if you have a significant trauma or significant childhood adversity or significant, all the new things you experience are going to be understood through the filter of those early experiences, right? And so I think the spiral staircase metaphor works for me a lot because yes, you're growing. Yes, you're going up the stairs. That's true. But when something does kind of prop up, it's going to be that same thing.
Well, I explain it to my clients as the thing that happened will have always happened. It's like your timeline is a circle.
Right.
And so the thing that happened might affect you, even though you've already dealt with it once. It's a different version of it. So I've written in my journal, written letters, when things have come up, because everything that you thought was going to be there is like a branch of your tree that's been cut off. And so you can feel the phantom bough of the tree that you thought was going to be there.
Yes.
And all of a sudden you notice, oh, there's that grief again, because it's not there like you expected it to be there. And I think that's a human experience. It's pretty.
Yes, right. It's just I had a supervisor when I was still like a master's level counselor. I don't know, like 100 years ago. And he was a great supervisor. And he used to say he didn't believe in closure, right? He thought of closure as something we're always approaching, but never achieving. And so it's like every time you start to get close to it, like you said, the thing in the history doesn't change. That's what happened. But every time we start to approach closure with it, we change. And then our relationship to it is new. And we have to reapproach closure. And then as we start to reapproach it again, we change again. And so because we're always evolving, you can never really achieve final closure, just always approaching it. And that changed.
That's my experience too.
Yeah, it changed the way I can sit with people. So we were just, we're recording this interview through Zoom, and I was booted out of Zoom mid-conversation. So we're back with Valerie again, and we'll pick up with where we left off. So we were talking about the idea about sort of closure being something we're always approaching, and so
definitely. I think it's just another level of noting the same thing, the thing that happened in another layer of it.
Right.
And I think that's good for people to understand, because otherwise they think that just because I dealt with it once or twice, that it's going away, and it's like they want to live like it never happened, but they are different because it happened.
Right.
I have a capacity to hold space for people because I have before.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything we experience changes us, good, bad, or indifferent. Yeah. And one of the pieces that I think is key, and it comes up in my coaching practice pretty frequently because I specialize in coaching people who have past trauma and adversity, right? So I'm not doing therapy with them. Most of them have already done therapy, right? And are doing much better. But somewhere along the way, something will trigger them, or they'll have a reaction to something, or they'll have a disagreement with a partner or spouse and react in an old way. And they're frequently surprised by that reaction. And one of the things I hope to do with this podcast and with my blog is sort of publicize or share the reality. I think the medical model approach to mental health makes it seem sometimes like, you have this illness, you have this depression or this anxiety or this trauma. And then when you get treatment, it heals you, which it does. But the idea that healed means it's gone, right? If I have the flu and I heal, I don't continue to have symptoms of the flu. I don't continue to have a fever or body aches or anything of that sort. But if you have trauma, even once you're healed and you no longer maybe meet the criteria for PTSD or an adjustment disorder, and you're thriving and your life is amazing and you're doing great things and you're fulfilled, there's still remnants, like you said, of what you've been through. You may still have a nightmare once in a while, or something that reminds you of that trauma or that experience might cause a reaction once in a while. So I think you're right on about, even when people are really doing amazing things, the history of it still lives in us.
Yes. And it actually has altered us. So we're more compassionate, we're more integrated, we're more whole, and we have a capacity that people who've had, less adversity, some of their stressors are different.
Right.
And so their responses are different.
Right.
And I'm not saying that all of us have our own challenges because we're living a human experience. But I think the people who've encountered and addressed and endeavored to heal have a broader capacity.
Yeah. There's actually research that supports, exactly what you're saying. And the findings, there was research on post-traumatic growth. And the finding in this study I'm thinking about was interesting because it demonstrated, a strong inverse relationship between post-traumatic growth and suffering. So basically what it's saying is that the people who have suffered the worst, and that doesn't mean they've had the biggest trauma necessarily, it just means they've suffered the worst, have the greatest amount of growth. And the idea is that the growth somehow comes out of the suffering, out of the meaning making. And so what's interesting is people who are more resilient, right? So even if they've experienced horrific things, but they have greater resilience, they don't develop the capacity you're talking about to the same extent that those who have suffered from those experiences do. And so while we would never wish suffering on somebody, and we think of resilience as a really great quality, that capacity that you're talking about for compassion, for patience, for sitting with other people is a direct result of having suffered yourself.
Well said.
Thank you. And so it is an interesting thing because we want to build resilience in people, but I also want as many people as possible to have this capacity for compassion and patience.
Well, I think the understanding is growing in our culture and in the world. Mm-hmm. The more that the generations have the capacity and access to do their own emotional well-being work, their holistic healing experience.
Yeah.
That to me is a really hopeful indicator that the earth can up-level people on the planet.
I hope you're right. I hope you're right. Yeah. So I'm wondering from here if you want to go into, sort of two reasonable segues here, and I'll let you decide which feels right for you. But I have some curiosity about you. You talked a little bit about some of your own experiences, but I feel like for me, we're missing the middle a little bit. I have some very early understanding of what your life has been like, and then kind of where you are now. But I think there's, at least I have some curiosity in the transition and what the transition looked like of getting here from there.
So sort of the middle.
Yeah.
You're interested in the middle.
Yeah.
Well, so I followed my intuition and inner guidance about what I needed to, how I wanted to look at this, and what supports did I envelop in my journey. So it's included 12-step programs. It's included my own counseling. It's included steps of support, such as journaling, calling a group member every day, getting my own counselor, going to graduate school for counseling then. So that all started. I didn't start counseling school. I call it counseling school until 2006. So I had a couple of years of my own personal recovery work and investigation in a holistic, deep way in the body, basically. And so I've worked with massage therapy, craniosacral embryology work. I've worked with William Emerson, a preeminent birth psychologist who does 5-day workshops, intensives of my own work. I did 2 of those. I've gotten training in developmental trauma. I got remarried and divorced when I realized I was in another relationship with probably neurodiverse man for the 3rd time, long term. So how many things have I integrated? I've had different counselors who had different skill sets. Yeah. And that's how I found the triplets, was a Splankna therapist, the Christian protocol, thought field therapy, neuroemotive techniques. And it's all of this together, as well as my own process poetry, my process painting, creativity. Yes. Generally, in the ways that I could at the time, addressing where I was in my emotional body's capacity, allowing sobbing, doing anger work, letting relationships go, allowing new relationships to form, different supports, changing socioeconomic status. That's a huge one. Yes. Yeah. And it's huge in both directions. I mean, I think most people understand that changing economic status in a downward way can be a challenge. But it can also be very difficult to move upward on the socioeconomic, right, to improve your socioeconomic standing, because we have ideas and messages about where we fit. And if you suddenly find yourself rubbing elbows with a group of people who are what you would have thought, I don't want to say they are, but who you would have considered above you at some point, you can feel very much like an imposter going that way. And so all the things you're talking about are incredibly difficult. I mean, to really do them, to do process artwork, to really do it, all of these things, the poetry, the therapy, the different therapies, require vulnerability, right? A willingness to be raw. Right? Yes. Yes. Thank you. That feels validating. There's so much about it that is a challenge. And I just think, why am I here? Why? Why did I choose to come here? And how have I chosen to address all of this throughout this journey? Yeah. And sometimes I have partial answers, and sometimes I'm still asking the questions.
Right.
And that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard because we do like to have answers to why questions. And sometimes we don't always get those answers, right? Sometimes we just need to replace why with what now.
Well, they say, my interpretation of in counseling school, they said, I got the idea that we don't ask why questions because it presupposes a because.
Yes, right.
And we don't always know what the answer would be. So anytime, and why can be a real club,
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm with you on that. Like,
Right.
just say how, where,
Yeah.
what.
Mhm. That same supervisor who schooled me about closure. There's a couple I can attribute. It's funny. It was you and I have similar stories. I didn't go back to my master's degree was in counseling as well. I was LPC before I got my doctorate, and I went back to school much later. I started my career as a personal trainer in the fitness world, and but this supervisor, there's a couple of funny stories with him. He was so good in this Jedi kind of way. Just as a quick aside, I remember one time we were sitting down to do supervision, and he was asking me about how a session went, and I said to him, maybe it's my issue, and I didn't even finish the sentence. And he went, "Well, of course it's your issue." Okay. I mean, he didn't even hear what the issue was, but he was right, But in this instance, one of the things he would challenge me, and he would challenge me hard. I would take a client back for a session, and he would say, "Ask no questions for the whole session. Don't ask any questions." And so I learned to have a conversational style with people instead of an inquisitive, investigative kind of style. And I got to a point, I think, in my practice where I will ask people questions, but very few. I use conversation more than questioning. But to your point and to what you were just talking about, he challenged me that each time the word why was about to leave my mouth, I should replace it with what's it like. So instead of, why do you think you reacted that way? I would ask, what's it like to react that way? And I got very different responses from people.
Well, the second one would feel more holistic and body centered than the first one of let's think about.
Yeah, right. And justify. The first one's asking for a justification, right? Why? And so your brain immediately looks for a justification instead of a description.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think descriptions and experience in the body are much more valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the brain is obviously necessary, but needs to be in service of the heart.
Right. And I would say that that's accurate not only in terms of healing and doing therapy, but it's equally as accurate in coaching. Right. Can't tell you how many people I work with or come into contact with who haven't achieved the goals they want. And when I talk with them about what it might feel like to be on the podium, to have that paycheck, to land that client, to whatever the goal might be, they have no idea. They have no idea how it might feel. And so it's like, well, if you can't even imagine it, it's going to be really hard to achieve. Imagine it incorrectly if you need to. We can fix it later, right? But let's start with some sense of what it would feel like, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if you would maybe talk a little bit about your experience in the differences between being a counselor, which essentially you're taking people who are suffering, who have symptoms, if you will, or some sort of diagnosis, who are struggling in some way, and sort of bringing them out of that and maybe back up to baseline, versus, and hopefully beyond, right? But at least back to baseline, as insurance companies would have us, they want people back to baseline. But versus being a coach, where you take people maybe who are already, at least for me, my experience is I take people who are already at least at baseline, right? They aren't clinical, and help them thrive and excel. And if you can talk about your experiences of yourself in both of those roles, and what some of the similarities and differences in how you approach them, and how you conceptualize, what techniques you use, however, wherever you want to go with it. But I'm interested in the two ends of the continuum, the human performance continuum, and how we intervene in both ends.
Well, basically, I just resigned from insurance panels. My last insurance panel, September 22nd, concluded. Thank you. So that's like 12 years of that.
Yeah.
And so I've done my time, I feel. And so working in the people who are ready to work with me as a counselor is going to be different when there's no diagnosis and insurance involved.
Right.
The coaching side is more about support and packages and programs and honing and ideal client base.
Yeah.
So it'd be neurotypical partners, which is what I am. And so when I realized that during my second marriage, and I was like, I did it again. What did I do? And I'm looking in some of the similarities, and there's a lot of us in the helping professions.
Right.
So how do I retain who I am and make decisions about what I want and need moving forward, need being primary?
Sure.
And how do I balance my stronger emotional and social capacities, whether I stay in a long-term relationship with a possibly more neurodiverse person, and move forward with who I am, which is really difficult for neurotypical partners.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's part of what I'll be doing in the coaching and the guidance model, the packages and programs, to see how a person can show up and they'll already have a counselor,
right,
or have had one, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
And there's also an online course that I have, which would be a really good method of screening anyone who might be able to work with me, so they can see what they can do to support themselves on their own, and then see if they need any of my support.
Okay. So go ahead and let's let people know, where could they find your online course?
My online course is still on my counseling website. It's on beyondbeautiful.net/education.
Okay.
So it's housed, it's got an introduction on my website. It's housed on thinkific.com.
Okay.
And so it's processed poetry using language to discover your true self. And it's a bargain price. I've got it at $250, but it's 6 units, 13 materials, and I talk them through it.
Yeah.
Of how to access some of the things that they might need to heal. And I encourage them that they have a counselor or someone safe to talk to while they go through the course, because it's a deep dive. It's not a surface. It's not a dog paddle.
Yeah. I think, first of all, I think good coaching in this area never will be, right? Like, really good coaching shouldn't be surface. But I think folks like you and I, who have had histories as clinicians, I can't do surface. I don't know how. I can't stay there. I can say to people, and I have, it's funny, in friendships and in romantic relationships and such, I have people say, like, can you just have this conversation up here? And I'll go, yeah, sure, no problem. And we'll start. And then 10 minutes later, deep dive, you know?
Well, I tell people that's not my area. If they want a cognitive behavioral therapist, I will help them find one.
Sure.
And I don't mind doing cognitive behavioral for stabilization or like, how are you doing day to day? Because, you know, they need to be day to day
Right.
in a good place to be able to do the deep dive.
Yeah.
I use a lily pad murky water scenario.
Yeah, for sure. You know, it occurred to me when you were talking about the various things you'd done for yourself to grow, that one of the things that struck me is the range of different approaches and modalities. And I would argue, and there's people who would disagree with me, but I would argue that that's incredibly valuable, because it's like, you know, looking at the same issue or the same problem from all these different perspectives. And I often have difficulty with people who are promoting their approach, right? So whether it's cognitive behavioral or whether it's, you know, emotion focused, and I was trained as an emotion focused couples therapy. I love emotion focused therapy, but it's a tool, not the tool, right? You know, Gestalt therapy or whether it's dialectical behavior therapy, all these names that we give these approaches, and they can be helpful in the sense that they, as clinicians, they give us kind of a roadmap of where to look, but they're also limiting because they don't allow us to look from other perspectives. Probably the most impactful therapist I ever had, and I will tell you that I generally don't think of myself as a cognitive behavioral guy, but the therapist who kicked my ass was Arnold Lazarus's daughter-in-law. She was a cognitive therapist. I lived in the same town as Arnold Lazarus, so I got to know him actually. But she was, you know, amazing and fantastic. But we exist in different areas, right? We have behaviors, we have thoughts, but we also have feelings and emotions and reactions. And if we're not working with all of those areas, we're sort of just, you know, sort of selectively ignoring aspects of ourselves.
My chiropractor does a version of work that's called biosequencing. It's what your body wants to heal next. And she works physiologically, structurally, and emotionally. And she says emotions are the base of the pyramid. And she said that I've done more work with her than any of her other patients, because she can find in my body emotional locks from different points in my journey, age-wise. It's fascinating. So I've discovered so many wonderful tools.
Yeah, right. And I agree. I think anybody who says this one approach is the approach, you know, might still have the capacity to help some people, but to me, they're sort of intentionally limiting, you know, their ability to do so.
And so do therapists. So like some counselors or coaches have decided that's where they're stopping in their healing learning journey. And I believe that stops the client in their healing learning journey at that. Whatever we're not willing to look at and you know, approach a healing capacity for that, I feel it can stop a client. So one of my recent clients, and she moved states, but she also, I was telling her about the new business model, and she said, oh, that's a lot. And I said, yeah. And if I'm not willing to do what's hard, how am I supposed to be asking you to do what's hard?
Right.
And she's got her master's degree in something else, but she was like, yeah.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the way I sort of, when I feel hesitation myself, like, oh, I'm not sure if I want to dive into that, or if I want to learn that approach, or, you know, what I always look at it as the other person, the person I'm serving, the person I'm trying to help, is going to get the message that like that thing is off limits for me. And now what happens is not only am I limited in my ability to help them, but now instead of me sort of taking care of them, which both ethically and like financially and business wise, I'm supposed to be doing, they have to take care of me because they have to avoid something that might be worthwhile for them because I might not be able to handle it. You find this around discussions of things like suicide or talking to people openly about experiences of sexual assault, things that might be uncomfortable. And, you know, I'm not doing therapy now. I'm focused solely on coaching, but these things still come up. And so having the ability, you know, I'm not doing therapy with people when it come up. I'm not healing it, but I still need to be able to, you know, be knee deep or hip deep in the conversation with them. And
yes, that's a really good point too.
Yeah. So I'm curious about your experience in both, like, because you do both, right? You do therapy and you do coaching. And so I'm wondering how you.
Well, in a coaching session, if there is something that I feel they need more connection or support around that's therapeutic, we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
There's always an option to go to therapy.
Yeah.
That's all. And now with the advent of so many of us doing it virtually, there's more selection, more capacity for people to find their best fit therapist.
Right.
It's always my goal for anybody to find the best therapist for you.
Right.
And I want to assist with that. I don't know if it's my middle child syndrome, my bachelor's in social work, but I want them to find, if I can help them, because it's hard coming on the front, knocking on doors of different therapists who might not call you back.
Right.
And so I want to support that. And if it gets in an area that I feel like is not coaching, is not guidance, is not education,
Right.
then I will discuss that with them.
Sure. And I think that's, you know, it's funny because we're both in that on Facebook, that Springs
Counseling community.
community. And that's always what's happening is, you know, we're looking, you post on there, hey, I'm looking for someone who does XYZ type of therapy or takes this sort of insurance. And so we're almost always like agents representing somebody else, trying to find the right therapist for them.
Yes, it's a great support, to help the community. It's a web of community support.
Yeah. Yeah. And and I think, the boundary, right, when you're in a coaching capacity, the boundary of saying, okay, so I'm not going to transition into doing therapy with you in this session. And you may not say that, right? But that's the boundary, is important for people like you and I who are qualified and experienced to do therapy. But I also think of people like my sister, for example, has a coaching practice for survivors of narcissistic abuse. And she's a teacher and an excellent teacher, and she's been a school administrator, but she's not a therapist. So she needs to have that boundary too. I think the difference, to tie it back to having the ability to have these conversations, is not where the boundary lies, but with how the boundary is presented, right? Yeah. The side that says, nope, we can't go there, that's therapy, I'll refer you to somebody. I view that as potentially, I see that as, dangerous to the relationship. I see that as, going to be very limiting to the client.
Well, part of my application process involves asking them about, have they had counseling? Do they have counseling now? What have they learned from their counseling? Because I want to know that they're solid. Right. To be able to do the coaching above the baseline, like you talked about. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really smart, getting a sense of how much they've grown already before they come to you. But I still when something does come up and we need to have the conversation with them about, hey, this might be something that is worth looking at with a therapist or a counselor of some sort, still having the bandwidth internally to discuss whatever it is without shame, without, putting up a hard, electric fence kind of a boundary,
Sure.
still being able to have the capacity to sit with it, to discuss it, and to gently make the referral to somebody who might be more appropriate for their needs, facilitates the growth process, in my opinion, more than the hard boundary that says, nope, can't go there, let me refer you to somebody.
Well, I'm always a person the relationship is paramount.
Yeah.
And so that's always going to be the most important factor.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw just this morning on one of the socials, maybe it was on Instagram or something, somebody who I hold in very high regard as a therapist, I think she's a psychologist, posted something about how it said healing is an inside job. And my initial reaction was, oh, that's a cool play on words. And I think that in a lot of ways that's true. You have to be internally motivated to want to grow. But the more I thought about it, I came to the decision that I largely disagree with that sentiment. I think most growth and healing occurs within interpersonal dynamics, right?
It's the attachment lens.
Yeah. I mean, I could go off into a, like a Buddhist monk or something, into a cave somewhere and meditate alone for however many years, and maybe even make great progress with understanding myself and what I've been through and how it affects me. But the minute I come out and interact with somebody who reminds me in some way of a past relationship, of, a past trauma, that's going to bring up all sorts of things that I didn't encounter on my own. And I'm going to have to be able to learn and grow from them and react to them within the dynamics of the relationship. So yeah, I have very much an attachment focus.
Yes. I think that sometimes when we make statements like that, it can feel shaming. Like, oh, what? I'm not supposed to need anyone?
Right. Yeah.
I have to do it all by myself.
Right. It's the spaghetti Western, right? You get the lone stranger, the cowboy who comes into town on his horse and helps the town rid themselves of the bandits or whatever. And, and at the end of the spaghetti Western, there's always some damsel that he kind of had a flirtatious thing with. And she says, oh, can't you stay? And he says, no, ma'am. He tips his hat. No, ma'am, I must be moving on. And he rides off alone into the sunset. And we've romanticized this idea when really it would probably be much healthier if he stayed and they had a big banquet to celebrate, and the bandits are gone and they're not harassing our town anymore, and we can connect and get to know each other. And in real life, that's probably better for everyone involved.
Right.
Sort of hardwired for that kind of thing.
Relationships.
Yeah. And everything from brain scans to different research studies demonstrates that we thrive better that way. And okay, yeah, there's some difference with, more extroverted people might need a greater extent of that. And, and people who are a little more introverted or a little bit more pensive might need a little less of it. But I've never seen any data supporting the idea that there's people who need none.
Right.
Yeah.
Good point.
Okay. So, I want to appreciate you for coming on and sharing, some of your own difficulties and struggles and how those have, helped you and maybe even motivated you to become a helping professional in different ways. I also want to be respectful of our time because we're coming up on a little bit of time. I'm not in a hurry, but I wanted to sort of give you an opportunity. Are there things that you feel like you've wanted to get to or say that we haven't quite hit on yet before we?
Jerry, I was just thinking about why I did this.
Yeah.
And I really want conversations to be started.
Right.
Or curiosity to be fanned, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's really biographical stories that we see ourselves in that can give us a little bit of distance from what happens to us, but also we get to experience us in another context.
Yes.
Which I believe makes it a little bit easier to approach something that's really hard.
Yeah.
And some of the times it's the things that we haven't looked at about ourselves or things that we accepted as, well, that I had a great childhood from the outside. Everybody thought it was great. You know how people say that? I had it, what? It was great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All the photos turned out well or whatever. We have matching dresses. What's the problem?
Yeah.
So I think that there's a little bit of a distance that we can find ourselves breathing into when we can see someone else's story.
Right.
And then it gives us a little, like, I don't know, it might start a little unfurling of something that's been really locked down before.
Yes. Right. And what keeps you more locked down than ideas about who you think you're supposed to be, so that other people will be satisfied, so that your parents will be proud, or so that your community or your neighborhood will think you fit in, or right? That's so inhibiting. I think the real growth, and you see it over and over again, especially for people who've been through awful things, is when they start to recognize, like, oh, wait a minute, that's not even a goal I had because I wanted it, right? Like that was so that somebody else would approve, and maybe somebody important, maybe my parents or my siblings, but we start to really grow when we decide to pursue what's fulfilling to us. Right.
Yes, and have a little bit more capacity for looking at it in a raw and unfiltered place.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the story that I encounter it every once in a while. Sometimes comes around on Facebook, but I've heard it periodically throughout my life, and I always feel like it refocuses me when I hear it. And it's the idea of like the young kid who asks the old man what he should do for a career, right? What would be a lucrative career choice, or what career would make him successful? And the old man tells him to do what makes him come alive, because the world doesn't need more financially successful people. It needs more people who are coming alive. And so, yeah, I think those conversations that you're talking about, and that curiosity and that ability to hear about and see ourselves through many different lenses, there's nothing wrong with having career success or financial success, but real sort of fulfilling, meaningful existence is about these kinds of interactions and communications I think you're talking about.
So I want to leave with a story because I think it illustrates what I just said.
Yeah.
And so I had my first child at Fitzsimmons Army Medical Center up in Aurora, Colorado. And it was a teaching hospital, an Army teaching hospital. And so they asked if a class could view and be a part of the birth. And I said, yes. I had to sign a release and everything, because it's important to me that people learn and grow.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm doing today, talking to you, sharing my story, giving an opportunity for other people to have some sparks of insight.
Yeah.
Or experience themselves in a little bit more of a newer or deeper way today.
And with your story, Valerie, don't sell yourself short. You want people to learn and to grow, and you yourself are very willing to be vulnerable so that they can grow and learn from your experiences. And that's
Yes.
really where the value is, you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's where the humanity is.
Yes, yes, for sure. And I, for one, am so grateful for that kind of vulnerability and willingness to be vulnerable. I mean, even on my little online communities, it comes through in spades whenever you contribute. You know, you
Oh,
want to
thank you.
share.
I'm glad.
It does. And it's so clear that you want to share your story, and you also want to know other people's stories. You know, you're the one who messaged me and said, "Hey, can we find out where people come from and what they do?" And right. And that led to some really rich online interaction. So
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity.
for sure. Why don't we wrap up by letting people know how they can find you, your, you know, websites, your socials, wherever people can find.
Sure. Yeah, right now my website is beyondbeautiful.net. And on social media, Facebook, I have Beyond Beautiful Counseling services. And then Instagram is Beyond Beautiful Pathways. I'm on LinkedIn, Valerie Bringas Montgomery. I'm on Twitter, but it's a weird spelling. You know how each social has its own
Yes.
culture?
Yeah.
And so, but anyway, so I'd be happy to talk to anybody. My email, telephone, or on my website. Reach out if you have a question, comment, idea. I love all of that stuff. Collaboration is my middle name.
Yeah. Well, and I think my experience of you is that that's true. And so I would encourage anyone to reach out to you and connect. And I want to thank you so much for your time. And I want to thank everybody who's either watching on YouTube or listening on whatever platform you use for podcasts. I appreciate your time and value all of your time. And so thank you everyone for tuning in and for being a part of this. And for more content related to what I do, you can look at either growthandthriving.com, all spelled out, growthandthriving spelled out.com. On Facebook, I've got Growth and Thriving with an ampersand, so not all spelled out. Growth and Thriving LLC. The online communities are Growth and Thriving After Trauma on Facebook, and Thriving Fathers, Parenting After Trauma, also on Facebook. Please, by all means, like the podcast, subscribe to the podcast, leave a comment or a question. If there are things you'd like to see more of or less of, please let me know. Valerie left her information, but if you want to contact her through me, you can do that as well. And I'm happy to help make a connection. And so this is, Dr. Jerry Sunshine Novak signing off, saying thank you everybody for listening. And until next time, take good care.